So John, can you kick it off for us? What are the key strengths of libraries to take into the future?
And the future library, however that configures itself, and we will discuss that this evening, the future library has to include those components, to my mind anyway. And libraries, when you look in the past, there's been continuity and change in libraries all of the time, all the way back, right beyond the Public Libraries Act that established the libraries, even in subscription libraries and all sorts of things. They altered and changed and modified what they offered for their environment. But the fundamentals of access to knowledge, access to books, access to magazines and all sorts of other information is fundamental to that. However that's delivered in whatever format. So it's that trusted public space which is open to everyone to use in their own way and to receive support and services and mediation if it's required.
Thank you. Anyone else want to come in on that? Duncan, from your perspective as a school librarian, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think moving forward, the library of the future has to be as much about the connections it makes as well as the collection it holds. And particularly as a school librarian. A school librarian has a very particular skill in that they can give the right book to the right child at the right time. And that book can instill a love of reading from them. And if we, as school librarians, can instill that love of reading, then that has to help with further education and then public libraries as well. The other part of my job, and where also I think we need to develop our skills as librarians, or what we do at the moment, is that we need to be able to teach pupils information literacy and research skills, and making sure that they are able to evaluate and judge what is relevant, what is trusted information, and that's a large part of what my job is at the moment.
I think there's something beyond that as well that comes into sharing the pleasure of reading and the enjoyment of reading and the understanding of that interaction with imaginative text as well. And I think libraries have a real role in mediating or curating people's experience with imaginative text as time goes on. And I think that social role that they have, and we shouldn't lose their social role as the heart of communities and the trusted space that you were talking about. But I think we also need to make much better for people, or much more obvious for people, the connection between the reading and the literacy and the information literacy and those sort of wider, apparently softer social benefits that libraries bring.
Yeah, can I add to that as well? Another thing is that I've gone through a whole generation of teaching, so 25 years from being a new lecturer to now being professor. And in that time I've gone from being the same age as the students and being like their sister, and now I could almost be their grandmothers, possibly. But I hope they don't see me like that. But what's happened is that when I first started in my academic role, when I came from my academic library post, was that students had real struggles finding information to help them do assignments. Now we've got the other problem. They needed help finding it in the past. Now they've got the problem of they've found it, but they've got so much stuff. They don't know what's the relevant stuff, what's the valuable stuff, what's the credible stuff. What can they use to write the assignments that they're asked to provide to become qualified in whatever they're studying for. So the mediation role has gone from one of somebody who is helping people find to one of helping people sort out what they've found and find something that really is valuable for the work they're trying to do.
So if we all agree then that it's a very valuable service, why are there so many negative stories circulating about libraries in the press?
I think there's a number of factors there. There's a strong story, you'll all remember this, with Google quite some time ago. It's quieting down a bit, and Google made a strong declaration about organising the world's knowledge, I think they said. Then they started a very aggressive and exciting campaign of digitising books, working with libraries, and that whole sense of transformation and content being available free at the point of use on the internet with no mediation and all the rest of it. So that's a strong story, and it's a strong story of transformation inside a space where the internet is transforming all sorts of services, banking, tourism, all the rest of it. So I think it chimed with the media, and they saw this decline in the library and saw it as something where they could accelerate that debate or have a reasoned debate about that. I do feel that has over time proved itself to be wrong, just the same as in the early 1990s there was this whole discussion, both in the library profession and more widely, about the disintermediation, this idea of cutting out the middleman. And the middleman was obviously the library. So if it's all available on the internet, the library, the mediation, the trusted space will not be required, whether it's in higher education, public libraries or anything else. Again, that hasn't turned out to be the case, because at the point that all of that debate was going on, the higher education libraries, further education libraries and public libraries progressed a whole capital campaign of refurbishment of spaces and whatever, and so they've actually become more popular in some respects as a space. They've absorbed different aspects, whether it's code and workshops and all sorts of other things, and they have still been, or still are, a relevant space for the community.
I think what the problem is that sometimes that information isn't getting out to the media, and whether that's a fault of us as librarians in portraying those stories and manipulating the press in the way that everybody else does to make sure that we do get the positive stories out, or whether that's a little case of the press actually deciding that they've already decided the narrative and therefore libraries are no longer relevant. And I think we as librarians, and I suppose also there's a role on the public as well to play to make sure that those positive stories do actually make the press and make sure that they're the ones that people read about as opposed to the negative ones.
The libraries have a really high, I can't remember what the statistic is, but a really high amount of public support. People really believe that libraries are a good thing. Intrinsically, we believe that they're valuable. But I was reading somewhere today as I was doing a bit of reading for this, that people don't fight for them until they hear that libraries are up against the wall, and if you don't come out swinging, they're going to go. And so by the time they get into the press, and by the time people are hearing those stories, it's a do or die situation. It's we're going to lose it if we don't shout about it. And we just need to get the stories out there earlier, I think.
Yeah, and I think there might be also a general problem. It's not news if it's not a disaster or something is wrong. The press likes to worry people. So, you've got a fabulous public library service. It's not really going to be the headline of the Daily Mail.
Can I also say that I think that all of that's true, but I do think the library profession have maybe not helped themselves all of the time. Yeah. We commission a lot of reports, and sometimes those reports are quite difficult to work through in terms of what it's actually saying in terms of trends. So for example, from 2008-9 to now, we know there's been a terrible economic downturn. We know that budgets have been constrained. We know that libraries, even National Library, others, have had their budgets really cut. So the amount of content they can acquire has been a real challenge for them. And so there has been a dip in some of the content that's brought in, and therefore there's not as much going out. And then it's gone up again and down. So within those small periods of downturn, then we have to be careful that we don't effectively write our own obituary, that we don't get into a negative position ourselves, whilst being realistic about the trends and about how we're developing and changing. But I think we have to be careful ourselves about the language that we use.
I think so, and I think you have to look and listen to what the public want to tell you. We did I don't know if any of you took part in this, but we did a Love Letter to Libraries campaign as part of Book Week Scotland last year. And, we had some high-profile people, and that went onto the Guardian website, and that was great. But actually, the thing that was really lovely was to see the letters that came in from kids and adults who were lifelong library users that they'd sent to their local librarian, talking about how valued they found the service in their community. And I think it's finding opportunities for people to share that and get those stories out there.
And John, you mentioned the economic downturn of the past few years, but it's also coincided with the rise of the personal reading device, or the Kindle, just to be nice to Amazon for once. How do libraries attract digital natives who are used to downloading? And Duncan, you were talking about trying to get boys to read. How do you remain relevant to young people who've got tablets or think they have everything and an abundance of content, a lot of it free at the touch of a button?
A large part of my job is now marketing both the library and the books that we have there. And I don't think it's a choice of either or. I think it's very much a case of, you're going on holiday, you might want to read everything on your Kindle. You come back, you might want to read something on printed book. You're going away again. So sometimes I think we break that argument down a little bit too easily, in that we have to choose. I think a lot of people will use both formats. We also have some anecdotal evidence at school that some of our boys actually prefer to read the printed book because it gives them the opportunity to turn off from the tech and actually step away from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Periscope, whatever it is they might be using, and they can actually then just immerse themselves in that particular world. There are no distractions. It's very difficult, and it's a constant battle, and I'm sure it's the same with the work that Philippa does at Scottish Book Trust, and even John with this, making the National Library relevant. But it's about marketing ourselves and making sure that what is there is relevant.
I was going to say, we have a problem with undergraduate students as well who think that they are using the internet when they're actually using the library services provided by the university library. So you'll say, oh, that's a really good article you've got for your assignment. Where did you get it from? They say the internet, and really what we're asking is, which database did it come off? Because we want to know if they're using the databases, and they are using the databases, but they just don't log it as such. So they say, oh, well, I went online, I was sitting in the computer centre, and of course they were routed through because of the really great work that the academic librarians are doing.
That's right, and it's about, that's part of this thing we're talking about, the service. We try and make the services as invisible and as seamless as possible, and that has been one of the issues in academic libraries. It's also the fact that there's two things. The first thing is that the e-books are relatively new, it's relatively recent. So remember what I was saying earlier about the long time scale, 400 years of the codex, and the book, magazines emerging and all the rest of it. The timeline is enormous, and we've got this small timeline where we're all getting very vexed about the e-book. The e-book is a convenient device at the moment, a convenient container for text, but effectively at the moment it's basically an online version of a book, isn't it? That hasn't transformed it. There's not so much video, there's not a lot. You can see it beginning to change and alter. But again, I'm not quite sure we can predict what that'll end up like being. I think Duncan's point's a good one as well. It's about reading and literacy as well. And that report was done quite recently about reading and literacy. Showed that children were actually using all sorts of different devices. They were using Kindles, they were using their phones, they were using printouts, they were using books, they were using a range of formats, and they were comfortably moving between them. I agree there is an issue with boys in terms of gaming and how they actually access that information.
But there's also some interesting stuff about e-book sales and the rise of e-book sales being absolutely slowest in YA fiction, and the take-up in teens has been lower than it has almost anywhere else in any market, which I think's interesting. And I think that unplugged point that you made is really relevant. I think there are different modes of engaging with content, and kids now will understand the printed book as one of those modes and will make choices according to what their needs are and what they're wanting to achieve at the time. They just have to be confident to do that.
I think we sometimes forget as well, there are still more people reading a printed book than the electronic books. Now, if you read the media, you wouldn't necessarily know that. You would think everybody has a Kindle. There are more people still read printed books than electronic books.
I think we also have to remember that there are still an awful lot of people out there who don't have the access to digital that we assume everybody has. It's not just not having a Kindle, it's not having access to the internet, it's not having access to a smartphone, it's all of this stuff. And again, if you listen to the papers, you would take for granted that everyone has universal access to this, and it's just not true.
Okay. So I think we will throw it open to the floor. And do we have a roving mic? I think we do.
Hi, I'm a recent graduate from Edinburgh University, and I study quite often for my exams. I've got two questions regarding to the difficulty in running a library in recent years. The first one is it more costly to run a library nowadays than it used to be? And what's the cost breakdown? What's the most costly aspect of running a library? And the second one is regarding to bringing people back to the library, which aspect do you think playing a main role? Is it the digitalization of information, or is just the fact that there are more ways for people to enjoy entertainment? They just spend more time like watching movies, doing other stuff rather than reading books, sharing some poems with their family. Which one do you think the main reason that people use less library these days?
Okay, I think probably we'll take the second question first then.
I think the question illustrates a point we were making earlier about the media and how sort of sometimes we're viewed, in that people automatically assume less people are visiting a library. I would rather look at it another way. How can we encourage more people to come to the library? Scotland's actually got a very good public library service. 3, I think, of the last 4 UK Public Library of the Year services have been Scottish: Dundee, Edinburgh and Orkney. I think we should actually accentuate the positive much more. And therefore, we should say, look, we're actually doing a good job here. You know, come and see what we're doing. You're the one that's missing out. Actually, loads of people are actually using the library. I came in here about 5 o'clock tonight. It was a little bit earlier for the debate. It's a glorious sunny day in Edinburgh, and there was people in this room, there was people down in the Scottish room, there was kids in the children's library. So people do use libraries, but there's sometimes this myth that we don't, and they're a dying breed. And I think we, and that includes the users, have to start portraying this positive message much more.
I think there's also an issue around the development of libraries, and also, so for example, take the children's library downstairs. You'll know the statistics about how successful and popular that has been since it's been reset and refurbished. It's always full. It's a fantastic example of making an investment in an area and really turning it into it's quite a vibrant destination. There's also initiatives that have been tried quite recently and have been rolled out around every child a library member, where effectively when the child was born in the first 6 months they actually are gifted a library ticket, and there's all sorts of different innovations that have been brought through to make sure that young people, young children have got access to library services. At the National Library, with the conversations we're having at the moment, is whether we can actually automate membership of the National Library in a way of working on a national entitlement card and all the rest of it. So a lot of that will bring access to facilities, whether it's physical facilities, or indeed, as you mentioned, this idea of you're actually using the library, but you're not actually in the library. And we need to make sure that we map that and make sure that conversation works well in terms of the statistics and use. The statistics and use I've got in front of me are amazing. And, you know, 500 branches, 100 million items added per annum, 30 million e-books available in libraries across Scotland. There's really strong statistics and figures there. I would say as well that we have to watch, and it gets back to what Duncan was saying about the media, we have to watch that people that are writing stories maybe don't use the libraries. And we all use this personal experience, don't we? We don't quite use the statistics as much as we like. And that's around maybe they don't use the public libraries, maybe they use other means, and that we should be careful about how that argument is positive.
I think the other thing we have to be really clear about is that it's not a one-size-fits-all scenario. All readers are different, they're all looking for something different, and different communities will have different needs. So it's not that one thing will work universally across the board. There are lots of good examples of good practice that can get rolled out and tried in different settings. I think it's also thinking about, you know, different age groups use the library differently. In discussions, 18 to 30-year-olds can sort of disappear for a bit, but then they come back when they are parents themselves, and they start engaging with all the stuff that is offered for their children. I think it's also thinking about adult learners, and a lot of adult learners who are starting out on their reading journey do not have particularly positive associations with reading, and therefore as a knock-on effect with libraries. So their needs are going to be very, very different than a regular library user in the centre of Edinburgh, potentially. I think you can't talk in a uniform way about what is going to encourage more people to use it. But I do think that the positivity is absolutely core to it all.
I think that as a panel we're agreeing that in the books business we need better PR, and I think it's true to say that we are quite understated as a sector. I don't think we shout out enough about things. Duncan, you mentioned Orkney. Orkney did win Library of the Year. It was a UK award. As you say, we're not going to see that on the front page of the Daily Mail anytime soon. But really, I think that in terms of PR, perhaps it's because books have been around for a long time, for 500 years. They're ubiquitous, they're everywhere, they're in schools, and perhaps we ought to kind of shout about it a little bit more, because I think that we're more understated than, say, the gaming sector or film or those. I just think that we're more modest people.
We've accepted the narrative that tells us that books and reading are worthy things, rather than you talk to individual passionate readers. I could talk to any one of you in this room and get talking about a book that you love, and you would be passionate and you would be convincing and you would be persuading me to go and read it. And somehow that enthusiasm and that passion isn't translating into how...
Is it perhaps because often reading is quite a private activity as well? So get a book group together and they make a lot of noise. But if you read a book by yourself, not say to somebody, I've read a really good book, but you're not telling 30 people. Whereas perhaps people are more likely to, if they see a fantastic film, they're probably more likely to shout about it on social media. And I suppose also there's the time limit. To see a film in the cinema, it doesn't last that long, so you get the message out quicker. To read a book, well, the book's published. We've got these fantastic libraries. It's on copyright deposit over the National. If you're really desperate and you have to sit in the reading room and read it there. But it's a different kind of media interaction which prevents people from being quite so loud about it.
I think what cinema's been really good with as well, because there was the whole, going back to the 80s and earlier, that whole death of film, video is going to kill the cinema, and cinema's been really good at articulating how their experience is different and what the real pleasure of the cinema experience is. And I think that's what the book industry en masse has to get better at, is what is so good about reading a book, what is good about that private solo experience that you then can talk about with other people, but you will only ever experience yourself.
Sorry, yes, I think we're just running out of time.
I was just going to say that a good library service managed by professional librarians, given appropriate support both financially and given support to do what they want, will offer a service to all their users, like Edinburgh Library does. Because at the moment, if you want, you can go and access a printed physical book, or if you want, you can stay at home and access it via Overdrive. You can go and read one of the magazines in the physical format, or you can access it via Zinio. So I think they are managing the both exceptionally well and making sure that they don't leave anybody behind, while still making sure that those who do want to be at that cutting edge are still seen as being valuable customers. And I think that's what it boils down to.
Okay, thank you. We're going to end on a note of positivity. As I mentioned in my introduction, I said that we have been working on the first national strategy for public libraries in Scotland. This is the document here, Ambition and Opportunity. I think there will be printed copies, but if you Google it online, it's something that was being prepared by the Carnegie Trust in the UK. It just came out last week. It will illuminate and indeed expand on many of the topics that we were talking about today, and will, I hope, give us a bit of a map and a roadmap for the future. And it mentions all kinds of areas, but actually it's a very positive and ringing endorsement, and I think when it was presented to COSLA, it received a very positive response. So let's keep it positive. So I think we will end there, and I want to thank you all very much for coming. Thank you to Edinburgh Libraries. Again, happy birthday. But I wish that, I think now that we will thank our panel very much for that. Thank you.